Good morning. Well, there were certainly some intense conversations over the weekend here at the Rencontre économique d'Aix-en-Provence. A bit of a French Davos to a certain extent, but attracting certainly names from abroad as well. A lot of central bank governors attending this meeting, including Christine Lagarde and Andrew Bailey of the Bank of England. Had some very intense conversation, of course, inflation and the economy very much at the heart of all these chats here in Aix. A lot of business leaders as well and names from abroad. And we had a chance to catch up with Heather Boushey, who's one of the economic advisors in Joe Biden's Council of Economic Advisors here. And that was a very interesting conversation. We did talk about Janet Yellen's trip to China. She said, look, intense competition requires intense diplomacy. And she was quite happy about this conversation. We're to hear more details from Janet Yellen, certainly saying these kind of talks are certainly the way forward when it comes to the relationship between the US and China. And we talked, of course, about Bidenomics. We talked about Joe Biden's speech that he gave last week in Chicago, trying to kind of reclaim that expression and lay the ground to his 24 electoral re-election campaign, of course, defending his economic record. So I did ask her to talk about Bidenomics. What did it mean exactly? And also how she was hoping to convince some of those US voters, considering that a majority in the polls consider that Joe Biden's economic record is not a positive one. And this is what Heather Boushey said.
So first of all, this has been the strongest recovery in terms of jobs that the U.S. economy has seen in decades. So we continue to see the number of jobs continue to grow, low unemployment. That has certainly benefited American families all over the country. And in fact, associated with that, we are seeing people having very high job satisfaction in America, record highs relative to years past. So that's an important place to start. Second, we've seen the inflation rate come down for 11 months now. We'll get new data next week, but we've seen it come down by over half. And here's the thing. The United States has seen stronger growth than other G7 countries, and we have not seen higher inflation. We've seen stronger growth, better growth in the economy overall, and yet the pace of inflation, while too high, and the president's been working on that, we've not outpaced our competitors. So the president focuses on that as Bidenomics in action. We are making sure that in these challenging geopolitical times with the unprovoked war in the Ukraine that upended global energy prices, the supply chain challenges, that the United States has done what it could do to benefit workers and communities, creating those jobs, keeping prices down, and we continue to work on that. So, and then third, we are making these investments. So far, since the president has taken office, we've seen over $500 billion of announced investments in clean energy and semiconductors and batteries all across the United States. People are seeing this in their communities all over the country. In every state in the nation, we're seeing new investments spark up. And in fact, the investments in new construction and manufacturing has been skyrocketing relative to historical trends. So this is all good news for the American people. The president understands that prices are too high, and he's been taking the steps that he needs to do, that he can do to address that. But we also are focusing on building that economy from the bottom up and middle out, making those investments in America so that we can thrive and we can make that transition to clean energy that is so imperative for America's national security, economic security, and competitiveness.
One of the key criticisms against Bidenomics is that this huge stimulus that it brought fueled inflation to a certain extent. So why do you tell these critics on this?
Well, here's the thing. So let's be clear, there's a number of different pieces. So what the president did when he first came into office, the American Rescue Plan, we were in the middle of a pandemic. And he put in place a policy that gave us enough flexibility to deal with all the challenges that came our way. And had we done that and the United States inflation spiked higher than anyone else, well, maybe you could make the case that it was about that policy. But the reality is that that isn't what happened. Yes, the United States had inflation, but so did other countries that did not have the same policies. So the inflation, the real cause was the global pandemic, and that is about the resiliency of our global supply chains. And so that is why we are making the investments that we need to make and why we are encouraging our friends and allies around the world to work with us to foster the resiliency in supply chains that we will need and to move us away from fossil fuels, which have these volatile prices, towards clean energy, where we can have more stable prices over time, where we can get away from some of the disruptions that the global economy can cause for domestic prices. So these are some of the things we've been focused on.
And that was Heather Boushey from Joe Biden's Council of Economic Advisors speaking to us here in Aix. And of course, here you heard inflation very much at the heart of a lot of the conversations here. There's also a conversation we had with Mr. Donohoe, who's the president of the Eurogroup here. We'll bring you this exclusive interview a little bit later. And he talked about how the Eurozone has a narrow path between putting control on that inflation but not hurting the economic growth. He said there is a narrow path there. We are on it for now. Of course, it is a tricky situation, but he thinks we are in the right direction. We'll bring you more of this interview a little bit later. Dan.